I never knew my Greek grandmother, a person I would have called Yaya, because she got very sick and died when my dad was only 5 years old. He didn't remember anything about her, and there were no photos, no mementos, so I just didn't know anything except that her name was Maria, which was my middle name. But other than that, no one ever talked about her. It was almost like she didn't exist. I did know my grandfather, though, a man I called Papu, and I loved him very much. My dad used to tell me stories about how he came from Greece in the early 1900s and how he worked really hard and tried to make a better life, but things didn't work out for Papu. And by the time I was born in 1961, Papu was a sickly old man living by himself in a tenement apartment in the South Bronx. My dad used to bring me to visit him all the time, and I loved to go and visit him because he made my favorite dish, chicken rice pilaf. And I can picture it now as a little girl sitting on his lap and eating that warm, creamy rice with a little bit of that cool, strained yogurt on top. And he'd bounce me on his knee, and he'd pat me on my head, and he'd tell me I was kolokoritsi, a good girl. And I love that man very much. Papu died when I was 12, and the funeral was terrible. The Greek tradition is that the casket is open during the Mass, and at the end of the Mass, you're supposed to go up and kiss the body and say goodbye. I had never seen a dead body before, and I really did not want to go up and do that. But my dad took my hand, and we went up together to the coffin, and we said goodbye to Papu. And when we got home from the funeral, my dad told me that he needed to tell me something about our family, but that what he was going to tell me was a secret and that I could never tell anyone. And then he told me the truth about the way his mother had died. The truth was that she didn't get sick and die when he was 5 years old. The truth was that my grandfather killed my grandmother. Supposedly she had a boyfriend, they had an argument, they were in the kitchen, my grandfather went crazy, he picked up a knife, and he stabbed her to death. And after my dad told me this, I was in shock. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I mean, who wants to hear that, that your grandfather killed your grandmother? I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. I was like, why isn't he in prison? Why didn't he never go to prison? And my dad said, well, he did go to prison for a little while. And then my dad got all teary. And then I felt so bad. I loved my dad, too. I didn't want to upset him. So I just gave him a hug and promised him that I would keep the family secret. And I did a pretty good job keeping the secret for most of my life. I mean, there were a few times in my crazy years, one of those 4 a.m. drunken stupor, bet you can't top this story kind of times. But other than that, I kept the secret. I put it out of my mind. I buried it. Several years after the funeral, my aunt, my dad's sister, went to Greece. She had found her mother's family. And when she came back from that trip, she brought a single photograph. It was a black and white 8x10 studio portrait. And it was the first time that I had ever seen what my grandmother looked like. And after my dad showed me the picture, he took it and he put it back in a manila envelope and stuck it in a drawer. And I was thinking, gee, why didn't he frame it and put it up on the family picture wall? And then I realized that it was still a secret, that she was still a secret. So life goes on. I am married. I'm middle-aged. I've got 2 kids of my own. I'm sitting on the computer and I'm Googling my last name. And up pops this article. And the headline says, "Kills wife, tries suicide." It was in the New York Times. It was dated February 8th, 1935, teeny tiny. So I start to read this article, and it says, in a jealous rage, Peter Derikas stabbed his wife. Peter Derikas, that's my grandfather. That's Papu. And then my grandmother's named, and my dad is named, and my aunt is named. And after I read this article, I'm like, wow, this really happened. She really existed. These are my people. And suddenly my lifelong secret became an obsession. I just wanted to know everything that I possibly could about my grandmother. I tried to talk to my dad, and he was not happy. He was like, look, this is a secret. I don't want to talk about this. You know how upsetting this is. He's like, please, don't resurrect my mother. So on my own, I decided to do some research. I found her death certificate, and I also found some court documents. And when I read these documents, I learned that my grandmother had been stabbed 43 times in her hands, neck, arms, chest, and back. And after I read this, I was in shock again. My grandfather, he actually was convicted of first-degree manslaughter and served only 3.5 years in prison before he was paroled. I found that pretty unbelievable, how someone could stab someone 43 times and only go to prison for 3.5 years. But I thought, well, I don't know, maybe in 1935, if you thought your wife had a boyfriend, it was okay to kill her. And then I thought, well, things have changed for women, but maybe not that much. And I started to get this visceral anger towards my once beloved grandfather. And at the same time, I felt this abundance of love in my heart for my grandmother, for this person that I never knew. And I wanted to know everything about her. I wanted to go to Greece. I wanted to visit her grave. And so I spoke to my aunt, and my aunt told me that my grandmother's body never made it back to Greece. In fact, she was buried in an unmarked grave in a cemetery in Queens. So I went to the cemetery to find her grave, and I'm following the groundskeeper, and we're driving through a very beautiful cemetery like this, and I'm thinking, all right, not so bad, beautiful place. And then we approached this area called the hillside, and it got really dingy and desolate, and the next thing I know, we're out of the car, and I'm following this man, and he points to this headstone, and he says, okay, this is where she is. And I'm like, no. There is no headstone. It's unmarked. That's a man's name. This can't be it. And he explains to me that in this particular area, the bodies are buried 6 people, one on top of the other, and my grandmother is at the very bottom. And this man's name on the headstone is the body on top of hers, and then there are 4 other unnamed bodies on top of that. And I just felt so sad. Like, how could somebody live their life and then there be nothing to ever show that they ever existed? And my knees buckled, and I got down, and I had my hands on the earth, and I don't know what I was doing. I was trying to get close to her, to feel her, I wanted to have her exhumed, right, and give her a proper burial. And after 75 years, there was nothing to exhume. So I talked to the cemetery people, and I'm like, look, I'd like to get her a headstone. Can I do that? They're like, you can, but you got to put that man's name on it too. I'm like, fine, put everybody's name on it. So I get permission, and I go home, and I'm really feeling good. I'm like, okay, this is good. We're gonna give my grandmother her rightful place in our family again. We're gonna get her a headstone. We can go visit, and I felt good about it. And then I get there, and I'm doing some posting on my social media, and I talk to my family, and they were not happy. I really didn't expect the backlash that I was gonna get. I had cousins, my aunt's kids, not all of them, but some of them, like, really angry and talking about me behind my back and saying I was, trying to do something for my own personal gain, exploit the family. And then I get this Facebook message from some 24-year-old guy in Greece who I don't know, telling me that he's my 4th cousin. And he starts telling me that I don't know the truth, and my grandfather was a really good man, and she was bad, she was loose, she dishonored the family, and he warned her, and he told her to stop, and she didn't listen, and he just did what he had to do, and I should just, forgive him. And I was like, forgive him? I don't know. From what I knew from my dad, my grandfather never expressed any remorse at all. As a matter of fact, he said she deserved it. And I was like, here's this poor woman, 29 years old. Imagine the terror, fighting off her husband stabbing her. I mean, what about 2 little kids, a 5-year-old boy and a 6-year-old girl, my dad and my aunt losing their mother? And I was like, forgive him? What about her? Can we forgive her? I don't care what she did. And I question the whole boyfriend thing, but whatever. I don't care what she did. She didn't deserve that. Nobody deserves that. And I was like, you know what? I don't care what you people say. I just was going to go on and do my own thing. except for my dad. I did care about what my dad had to say, and he was really upset. And he's, look, Angela, he said, this is not your story to tell. This is very personal. This is my story. You don't know what it was like growing up without a mom. It's really not your place. Leave it alone. And I said, Dad, I understand and I feel what you're saying, but it is my story. That was my grandmother, too. She was killed at 29 years old. If she had lived, I would have known her. I would have had a relationship with her. I said, I just want to give her her rightful place in our family. And after that, my dad gave his blessing, and he and my aunt were actually very helpful in getting the headstone made. And on a beautiful day in May of 2010, a dozen of us family members gathered around a brand new headstone with my grandmother's name on it. We represented 4 generations of my grandmother's descendants. My aunt, who was 81 at the time, she brought seashells, and she scattered them around the headstone, just like she might have done as that little 6-year-old girl. My dad was 80. He brought that photograph, which he had had framed, and he put it on an easel next to the headstone. My cousins who were there brought flowers and read poems. My older son, held the music while my younger son played Amazing Grace on the saxophone. And some people thought it wasn't wise to have an 11 and a 12-year-old boy involved in all of this, but I did. I thought it was important for my boys to know that what happened in our family was not okay. And I also wanted to alleviate them of the burden of this 75-year family secret. And after our family did all their things, Father Nick started with the incense and going around the headstone, and he was chanting and praying in Greek, and it was beautiful. It was intoxicating. And my dad took my hand, and he leaned over and he whispered, "Thank you, daughter. Now I don't have to feel shame anymore." And I felt my grandmother's spirit all around us. I felt like she was bursting out of the bottom of that grave and just free from this 75-year secret. And I felt all of her love all around us. And I looked at my dad and my aunt, so happy that they could say goodbye to their mother. And then I looked at the headstone. And my dad said to me, "You're a good girl, Angela. Kolo koritsi. Your grandmother would be proud of you." And I don't know if that was true, but what I did know that on that day, I wasn't saying goodbye to my grandmother. I was just getting to know my yaya, this woman, Maria Anastasiou Derecas.